Amherst County Service Authority Board meeting to order. First agenda item is citizen comment. Do you have any citizen comment? Seeing none, we'll move to the approval of the agenda for the May 2nd board meeting.
Make a motion, we approve the agenda.
Motion on the floor. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 4th, 2023 board meeting.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Para.
You're doing such a fine job. My apologies for being late. My other meeting ran over just for a little bit.
We're on the monthly financials.
Thank you. Item 5, the monthly financial report. Mr. Hall?
Yes, and looking at the monthly financials, our cash postings look good. I want to present the financials as written. Unless you have any questions, I will just give you a couple of comments. Our water and our sewer revenues are up. Our sewer revenues are actually screaming at 52% above where we were last year at this time. I haven't had a chance to really dig into that deeply, but it looks to me that our commercial additions to our water system are really showing up. Also, we've had 3 new water connections and 3 new sewer connections in the month of March. Unless you all have any other questions concerning financial, that's all I have.
Any questions from the members of the board? Are mics hot? Does this sound like
Yours,
mics
not
hot?
your own.
Ah, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Pugh. Any other questions from the board? All right, here, we'll move on to the next item then. Next item is old business. That would be the Assistant Director's Report, item number 6A. Mr. Hall?
Okay, so just keep in mind, I've combined the previous executive director's report into mine just for this during the interim. And again, I'd like to present this as written unless there are any further questions. One highlight I will say is that on the Lakeview Sanitary Sewer Project, we did have bid openings yesterday afternoon. We did extend the duration of the project to hopefully attract more contractors. We also extended the bid date. Didn't seem to help. We had one show up, and I'll talk more about that further after I get some comments back from our engineering consultant with recommendations. But it doesn't look too promising. Now, you know, didn't want to get into it too much, but it just seems the market is flooded with construction projects like these. And so it's hard to get interest at this time. And so we may back up and punt and look at a different way of taking care of accomplishing this project. With that being said, if there are any other questions concerning the Assistant Director report.
Any questions from the board concerning the report? A lot of detail in there, of course. Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to new business. We've got several new business items today. I'll take the first item in new business. This is in section 7, 7A, the ACSA Resolution 2023-A-005-R Interim Executive Director and Acting Secretary Appointment. At the end of the last meeting, it came to our attention that we had not done that yet. And I spoke with most of you. I think somebody was traveling in an exotic location. I did not speak to that gentleman. I didn't want to bother him. I was jealous. But it seemed to be some consensus about making Mr. Hall the interim acting director. If there is any discussion on this, I suggest that we would move it to a closed session item. And I'll just ask, would anybody like to discuss this in greater detail in closed session, or can we move on in open session with this resolution?
Only thing I would like to discuss is acting pay, but I think we can do that in a closed session, I guess.
Actually, that's on our agenda for the closed session.
Well, if it pleases the board, I'd make a motion that the Service Authority adopt and execute ACSA Resolution 2023-A-0005-R, appointing Mr. Richard Hall as interim executive director and acting secretary.
Okay, any discussion on this motion? All right, then all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Is there any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations, Mr. Hall, on your interim and acting secretary appointment.
Thank you.
Okay. Would you please move us into item B, the ACSA resolution for the Gateway Sanitary Sewer Project funding?
Okay, so the board is being asked to adopt and execute ACSA Resolution 2023A-006R, approving the issuance of the interim financing for the Gateway Sewer Project. We've had multiple discussions in previous board meetings, also at the Board of Supervisor meetings. Unless you have any questions concerning this, we didn't prepare for another presentation. We thought we'd present it as is with the documents that were sent. We do have Mr. Daniel Siegel here if there are any questions concerning this resolution.
And Mr. Hall, I understand this resolution has come before the Board of Supervisors, or not the resolution, but the project has been discussed with the Board of Supervisors. They're on board with it. We've discussed this at a previous meeting. We're on board with it. This is more the functionality of approving the actual legality, the resolution of the matter. And then and from that point, it gets forwarded to the Board of Supervisors. Is that correct, or
Well,
what's the process? Could
Should
you
I speak?
Please.
Okay.
fill in the
I'm
process?
Dan Siegel from Sands
You've
Anderson.
done?
I know you've seen Paul a bunch, but
Yes, sir.
I'm here today for Paul. Yeah, so the board's already adopted. I don't think you need to, you can send it to the Board of Supervisors, but it's not necessary. They'll get a transcript. We're slated to, assuming, everything's approved and you're fine with it. If you're not, I'm here to answer any questions, but it should close May 11th. Is that right, RT?
Okay.
May 11th.
So for the benefit of the public and anybody that's watching, since it has been approved, thank you, the process has been approved by the Board of Supervisors. The authority signs off on this, we'll have a bond resolution that is backed by the Board of Supervisors, correct?
Yeah, I did want to explain that we did have discussions that in a meeting, and a memorandum of understanding would be forthcoming, but would be part of the permanent financing after the interim financing period, once we've established the scope of work and have a better detail moving forward.
Okay.
And what that would do would be, for the public, is that the county will back this interim or back the financing until we reach a point where revenue allows the service authority to take over the financing down the road.
Okay. Thank you. That being the case, would somebody from the board like to make a motion, please?
I'll make a motion that the ASA Board adopt and execute ASA Resolution 2023-A-0006-R and the reference financing agreement, support agreement, and form of Series B note for the Gateway Sanitary Sewer Project.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wade. I'm looking at the certification on the back. We do have a quorum today, and I think that's the only thing I had to certify, and it is being duly considered. So at this point, is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Any abstentions? There are no members absent. The motion passes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, just to make clear, that was a unanimous vote of the full board?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Great, so we'll play that. Thank you.
Okay, next item is item C, the 2023 pro forma cash flow update.
Great. Thank you. I wanted to say this before Mr. R.T. Taylor provides a presentation. I'm finding it's not so easy to convert from a calendar year budget to a fiscal year. Everything's really crunched in there. We knew the budget cycle is ending. We know we have to have a budget going into next year to be legal to operate, pay bills. So we asked Mr. R.T. Taylor if he could take a look at it. This is really crunched, short notice, and we really appreciate you doing all that you've done to try to help us get something together. So with that being said, it's kind of leading into the next, but I do want to tell you, before, in putting our budget our draft budget together, normally we lean on the pro forma. And because of certain things, I mean, we didn't have the audit complete. We don't have the audit complete at this time for 2022. So that's a factor in there. Some other things took place. Unfortunately, Mr. RT's been out as well for personal reasons, so, but we do have a pro forma to present. Hopefully, it would allow us to lean on that for the draft budget to make some adjustments after this meeting. But I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here today. For the audience viewing from home, my name is R.T. Taylor. I'm with Davenport & Company. We work as financial advisor to the authority. We typically do our annual update in the fall timeframe, and that's because the authority has been on a calendar year, fiscal year basis. So December 31 is your typical or historical year end for fiscal purposes. And typically your audit is done within 6 months thereafter. So again, we usually have a completed audit by the time we are doing this report. And that's why it's timed usually in the fall. For the past year or so, y'all have been converting to a June 30. So we are a little bit, call it without audited numbers, but we have been working closely with authority staff and county staff to get good numbers year to date and unaudited, if you will. And so our projections that are shown in the report that you have in front of you today, and again, it wasn't included in your packet, as we've been doing the past couple years, is coming to you with, call it a draft report, to give you talk you through it, give you a little bit of time to consume and digest what's being presented to you, and then follow up within the next couple weeks should y'all have specific requests, comments, clarifications that need be. But again, this is in an effort to get you sort of call it the max rates as we see them for next year going into your budget process. So the authority, to be clear, sets the rates for the system. The county does issue a public notice to the constituents because they end up adopting, the county board adopts the rates you all select and approve into the county's ordinance. That's just historically how it's been done. So that's why we're here a little bit beforehand to get you sort of this in front of you, talk through it, and address any questions you all might have before actually setting those rates. So if I could start just on page 2 of 19. The page numbers are in the bottom center of the page. Starting with our goals and objectives as it relates to rates, fees, and coverage. The pro forma is done every year to give you all good information to work with in order to make decisions. Historically, there have been moments in time where the authority has had, call it, gone away from, let's say, rate increases on an annual basis to keep up with inflation or other operational challenges, and ended up having to do some significant increases within a short span of time. So the report for the past, call it decade, has been in a mode where we show up, report to you what the projections are based on the good information we have from staff, and try to minimize any potential of those sticker shock moments to the user base like I just referred to a minute ago, trying to levelize and step up to stay ahead of our capital needs, budgetary and operational challenges, et cetera. One of those key benchmarks that we try to manage to, not just for best practices, but also because it's part of our covenants, our debt covenants that we have with the state bond pool program called Virginia Resources Authority. In short, the upshot of it is if you take your operating revenues, back out your operating expenditures, how many dollars do you have left before paying your debt service? And VRA has stipulated in your bond documents, you need to have at least $1.15 for every dollar of debt service. So that's one of our key benchmarks that we manage to. If you'll turn with me to page 13, this is not a bond covenant requirement. Rather, it's a best practices internal policy for the authority that we're going to maintain our non-designated cash reserves, that being our most flexible pot of money that hasn't been designated for specific purposes. We're going to maintain that at or above a 50% of our budgetary revenues. That gives us flexibility throughout the fiscal year to say, okay, well, for some reason revenues might not be coming in, or we have an emergency situation and we need cash now. We've got enough money comfortably in the pot, so to speak, to be able to address those needs that are unforeseen. We do have, over the past, call it couple years, we've been trying to reach an aspirational target of 75%. And let me explain the difference. Your current policy of 50% is measured at a specific point in time, at the end of your fiscal year. But as we all know, we collect and spend at different rates during, call it on a monthly basis during the fiscal year. So if we're only at 50% at one point given in the year, we might dip below 50% during those months when we're paying our expenditures, and come back up to 50 by the end of the fiscal year. So one of the thoughts has been maybe we should set an aspirational target of 75% as measure that, so that when we go throughout the course of the fiscal year, maybe we don't dip below that 50% reserve we want to maintain in any given month. So that's just food for thought. And one example you'll see there at the bottom is where a few years ago where related to the James River Bank stabilization project, we needed quick access to $570,000 for cost overages. And that had to come from somewhere, and instead of doing a short-term borrowing, which can add expense, the authority was in good position, managed fiscally responsibly to have those additional cash reserves, and was able to dip into those reserves for a short period of time before you replenish those funds. So that was, again, going back to best practices. We just feel like maybe we want to reach a little bit higher level than 50% to give us that much more stability. Pages 4 and 5, as y'all have probably seen numerous times over the years, Draper Aden, which, don't ask me to quote the new name of the company, it slipped my mind. Thank you. They produce a report that shows, for various states, but for our purposes across Virginia, other local governments and water and sewer authorities that have their rates published, the number of user accounts, et cetera, good data that we can compare ourselves to. And I think the upshot here is, on the water side, our average bill here for the residents is slightly higher than the average compared to our working group here, or our peer group. But you are lower than 6 of those 14 peer entities. The average water bill compared to the 2 MSAs that we compare ourselves to, you're slightly higher than their averages. Our connection fees and availabilities are sort of flip-flopped in that the connection fee that we have of $1,500 is below the average for comparable similar-sized entities, but our availability fees are slightly above that average. So again, that's all dealing with water. One thing you'll note at the bottom bullet is, given our anticipation of potential growth here and trying to position ourselves to growth, we just might want to give some additional thoughts to how we want to, whether it's increase or structure our rates and fees going forwards. We just might want to start digging in a little bit more on how those get applied so we can achieve our goals of, staying ahead of our capital needs on an existing base, creating capacity for future projects for growth, while maintaining our competitive levels with rates and fees compared to our peers. On the sewer slide, wastewater slide, the upshot is the same as the previous. We're a little bit higher in our rates, but at the same time, we're not an outlier with our rates and fees. We're in the mix or in the hunt, so to speak. And then we had some observations on page 6. The authority system, and based on number of counts and flows, has remained relatively flat over the past several years. However, like we just talked about, more recently, the county has been approached by developers, and is poised for potential growth. So I think we're in a good position as the upshot. We've got some maybe considerations to work through with respect to how we structure fees and rates, et cetera, so that we stay competitive and we have the ability to shift with the tides, whether those are recessionary and global, call it macroeconomic variables, or if it's, again, on the growth side where we need to be able to stand the ready to get infrastructure in place for new development. The challenges we face as a system, number one, switching to the new June 30 fiscal year, which once we get through a cycle or so, it's going to be just fine. And we will be able to, I think, better get ahead of the budget time, because the June 30 fiscal year means our audit should be ready by the end of December, which gives us plenty of time to get to this point and have firm set of, verified numbers, for lack of a better way of putting it. But we do feel good about the numbers that are in here. Maybe some tweaks in there will come to fruition. But the way it is right now, we're working with what we'd like to call unaudited or very close to final numbers for '22. We've got some impending, we've got to implement mandated projects, which you all may recall, we're working on the $7.5 million raw water intake project, which, based on our historical conversations and our understanding, that was a mandated project. We have another one that's out in fiscal year '25 that we've been planning for, that's built into the modeling that's done here. That has not changed. So those are other challenges that we have that we got to plan for and have been planning for. Building in that future capacity that I alluded to earlier, making sure we have room to grow, so to speak, with respect to our fiscal health. Determining the appropriate balance between what the authority must maintain and replace for the existing user base, and just want to make sure what you see, what we have on the next slide for recommendations, all this information has built into, refurbishing and replacing existing lines on a regular basis annually. It's also got a couple of these projects that are both, that we borrowed for short term, and their long-term financing has been baked in as well for projection purposes. So we've got all that baked in here, but it is something that we just want to highlight as a challenge, because we want to make sure we keep addressing it on a regular basis with you all to make sure we're doing it right. And then again, like I said a minute ago, maintaining rates and fees at levels sufficient to meet those ongoing needs while remaining competitive with our surrounding peers. On page 7, our current reserves are at good levels. However, the authority may want to consider building reserves higher than current levels in order to stave off emergency needs and the potential needs for higher than normal rate or fee increases. Right now, as of fiscal year '22, the way we've estimated your cash, your non-designated, so your flexible pot of money as a percentage of your budget, looks pretty high, right? It's at 127. But the caveat there is we've got some monies that have been transferred over from the county to help us in anticipation of those future projects that we're going to use to offset those projects.
And, excuse me,
Yes, yes,
Mr.
sir.
Taylor.
Mr. Barrow.
And you're suggesting that non-designated cash reserve be 50, well, that's the one that has to stay at 50% to meet some of our policies and obligations, and you're recommending that be moved up to 75%?
Correct. Yes, sir.
It's currently at 127 just because of circumstances.
You got it.
Got it. Thank you.
So on the pro forma details, and I'm not going to walk through the details. I want to give you the tidbits here and have you contemplate that and digest that. But we've got the details of the pro forma work, and I think it's been brought up several times before in the past couple months that we want to pay a closer attention to our consumption levels. So I think you'll like the added detail in the back. We have a tab on consumption, so y'all can kick the tires, so to speak, on that, and let us know if you're seeing anything that's an anomaly. From our perspective, y'all are within a pretty consistent relative range on the usage for both water and sewer. Nothing that stuck out to us, but we wanted to add that to this report going forward, Let me turn now to the preliminary recommendations on page 8. So what it boils down to is trying to get implemented for the budget in '24 and beyond. As we've done historically, is we've looked out for, call it a 3 to 5 year period to see what our level rate increases would have to be to hit our targets, meet our bond covenants, and make sure we've got enough capacity in our current system to address existing needs and the needs that we are looking to implement over the next couple of years. So for water, increase user rates by 6.76% to 6.58, which basically gives a monthly user residential equivalent bill of 55.95 based on 5,000 kilograms per month usage. Sewer, similarly, 7.6% to 1013 per HCF, which would basically put a monthly equivalent unit to, or bill to $72.17. Beyond that, as we've been directed previously, we understand that the authority has been wanting to hold the line at $24 for the basic service fee. It just may be time to maybe give that some reconsideration, but I want to give you comfort that in our pro forma that we're presenting to you today with these recommendations, we have not touched that number. And again, this goes back to the concept of rethinking through how maybe we structure our rates and fees. The sewer, to continue increasing the basic fee by $1 annually, which has been done historically. And based on the above, the authority should meet its operating and capital obligations for the foreseeable future. This report is based on the best available information to date and should be updated as soon as practical once the audited information is completed. Any questions on anything that I've sort of gone over? Does it make sense? Does something stick out to you as gives you heartburn or anything that?
I'll turn to the board. I've got some thoughts, but, Ms. Wood?
So if we increase those rates at the top of, as proposed, top of page 8, then we're going to be the highest, right? And
Well, that's a stale report, right? It's always a lagging report, and everybody else in that peer group is sort of, that's what was reported at a given point in time. So what's coming up, that's not their forward projected rates for the upcoming year.
Right.
You would think that there's going to be some changes, whether up or down, given the entity.
Sure.
But that would be sort of lockstep. You're still falling within a certain range.
right?
I can't speak to what the other entities plan to do for their upcoming budget year.
But based on this information, that would put us at the,
Right, assuming everybody else stayed flat, you'd go up above, correct?
One question, back to the non-designated cash reserves.
Yes, sir.
We're at 127%. Saw some work coming down the line there and funded appropriately. Where would we be if that, do you have any idea where we sit percentage-wise if that weren't the case?
I don't have that at my fingertips, but we can get that to you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I have a question. On page 10 of your report here, these are the actual increases that we've implemented since 2018. Is that correct?
Let me get there, Mr. Pugh, sorry. Yes, sir, that's what we have, that's what we've got reflected in our modeling. That,
So all the way up to, what year would this be we're considering now? Would this be 2024?
24, yes, sir.
So the last increase was 4.38%.
Yeah, our understanding for the budget year, since y'all were, for budget year '23, is that was held, the report we did in the fall of '21, which again, y'all hadn't made the switch yet, it was held flat, meaning for budget year '23, instead of doing any rate increases. So instead of implementing an additional increase to stay on level, that was a 1 year sort of flatline the budget. Does that help?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I was just looking at a historical rate increase, how much it has increased since. I mean, that gives me information that we can look at to see how much we've increased it over the years versus what we're thinking about doing going forward. You also made reference to a 2025 project, and I may know that, but what is the 2025 project?
It's the upgrade for the Williams Run lift station, sewer pump station.
And that's, Mr. Pugh, that's on, if you look at the bottom numbers, page 13 of 19. On this chart, if you look at line 319, on the left-hand side, Williams Run Sewage Pump Station Improvement, that's out in 2025 at $5 million.
Yeah, that $7.5 million raw water intake sure does hurt, you know.
It really impacted the model because as we talked about back in the fall and maybe over the past couple months, we've been working with the $5 million projections provided to us previously, and then it was brought to our attention. The engineers revisited that number more recently with, I guess, the inflation and escalatory things they're seeing in the market and gave us a number, you know, closer to the $7.5 million number. So that, and you may recall, we reported that if you level set everything, it was going to be at a minimum like 6.5%,
Oh, yeah.
7.5%, adjusting just for that component of it when we were here just a month or two ago, and even back into the fall, I think is when we first reported on it. Might have been your early December meeting.
Yeah, just, it kind of restricts, to me, it restricts this board a little bit in what we can do. If you look at the increases that we've had versus, and Mr. Wood was talking about our rate increase, we would be up there potentially at the highest level. I don't think that would be good for us, you know, if we want to be business friendly, or just for the people, you know, that are paying the bills. So it kind of puts us in an awkward situation going forward of what we can and can't do, or how we're planning on funding some of these potential projects that may be warranted.
Could I add on to that, Mr. Pugh? I think that's a good point, and I think it was the previous meeting, Mr. Martin raised some questions about that project. I've had some subsequent talks with Mr. Hall and actually the DEQ. I've asked Mr. Hall to set up a meeting with the DEQ to further understand the requirement behind that project before we start spending money on it, and to make sure that we understand it to be as it was described to us previously.
You're in regards to the raw water intake?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It does look like it was required, but we may have met the requirements that put it in place in a different way.
So it's
So-
not too late if something does change?
It's.
Maybe?
Maybe. I'll just say maybe. I'm not going to commit to anything, and I don't know anything I can commit to. There certainly will be some cost. It may be that there's a better allocation for this dollar, of these dollars, and it could be less dollars as well.
And just to add in that, to put a finer point on it, it was sort of going into this, the flexibility of doing that short-term note. We all considered, here's the evolution of what we got going on as this project evolves or it gets redefined. That revenue, that bond anticipation note is flexible such that you can pay it off after the first year anniversary, basically. So if you, let's, for example, just go with me for a minute. If that project gets cut in half and let's $4 million, you could take the bond proceeds, the bond anticipation note proceeds, right? And pay off the note for that portion, continue your project, and once you have the final amount in place, that's all your long-term financing would be. Does that help? Okay.
I don't have an answer to the question. I just wanted to let you know there was a question
right.
that's being worked on.
Hopefully it's not false hope, but
Hey, I'd like to commend Mr. Hall for coming up with some documentation that shed some additional light on this.
thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Parrott.
Yep.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Hall, any idea on when that meeting was scheduled for?
We're working on it. Mr. Hall's got his hands full, but have you had a chance to make any progress on it?
I haven't, I'll be honest, I've been putting in a few hours, so I haven't had a chance to follow up on that.
I did have the opportunity through another connection meet with the head of permitting for DEQ, the person that signs off on all water withdrawal permits. And spoke with her about it, let her know it's on the radar screen and that we'd be kind of, in fact, she was going to give me a call, then that hasn't happened yet. So it's moving at the pace of state. Okay. Do you have any other?
No questions.
All right. Ms. Martin, any thoughts?
Yeah, but he left. Oh, you're getting me one of those Davenport.
talking, I was gonna do the quick math for.
I thought you were getting a Davenport pen or something. Okay. So what if we just said, yep, we hear you, but we're not in a position to raise rates again? What would that do to us?
So you wanna see what that scenario looks like?
I'm asking.
You would run the risk of not hitting your benchmarks for bond covenants, and then you could run the risk of, again, it could be short-lived. If the project gets redefined and you're able to,
Or maybe I misunderstood, but, so our policy is 50% reserves.
correct,
That we should aspire to have 75%, but right now we're at 127%.
yeah, and if you back out the $1 million or so that the county gave to the authority, that's what I was gonna do quick math on, but we'll just get that to you later.
We're flush right now, but
And I think the limiting, if you look to page, bear with me. If you look to page 11, okay? I would say cash this go-around, because you are flush, for lack of a better way of putting it, with the monies you've received from the county. That's shown on line 51, right? Your minimum point there is out in 2028 at 79%, okay? I'm looking at the far right-hand column, 2028, almost the last line, second to last line. So that's your cash. You're above the 50% marker. What I'd like to just, if you go up just a few lines to line 48, parity debt service coverage, you hit your target minimum in 2026. And that's where we're assuming bringing on the long-term portion of that additional debt, right? So you've sort of, that's where you're bottoming out, so to speak, on your, and that's not your policy, that's not an internal policy, that's what you gotta meet for debt service covenant purposes. Okay? So if, Mr. Martin, to your point, if you wanted to level set or just call it half the increase for the next year, right? To sort of mitigate some of this until some things are further known, you could do so, and we can map that out for you to see what that is, what the rate increases would have to be out there. But again, you're sort of,
Well, if we
without
wanna do-
having that project redefined and having updated numbers, once we find out, you're sort of playing a guessing game and, you know,
So if we do the projects kind of as proposed up to this point,
yes, sir.
we really don't have a choice.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Other questions? I'd like to get my head into that, I guess that percentage reserve also. But I guess my understanding is it can't fluctuate, or it should not fluctuate below 50% on any given time throughout the year. And you say it does, and that's,
It could very well do that, yes.
okay.
75% seemed to be the, based on your burn rate on a monthly basis, 75% was a good, call it, a good target to remain above the 50% level during the fiscal year. Not saying you're completely, you're not completely protected from being that, because we don't know what emergencies could pop up, but it should be based on your regular burn rate.
Well, given where we are, I don't think we should be trying to shoot for the aspirational rate. If there's a different number that keeps us meeting our statutory requirements, and, not our statutory requirements, but our covenant requirements.
Right.
Then if that rate comes down a little bit, that'd be good. I am concerned at the order of magnitude of the increase as well. Tell me about timing. So I'm trying to recall when these increases go into effect. They're written into county code. When does that happen typically? Is that because I'm just trying to think how we changed our fiscal year. We did not do an increase in rates on this half year.
Yeah, typically, we would have a pro forma in the fall. The last time we adopted a rate increase was February of 2022. So around
Okay.
January, February. So at this particular, where we are right now, we're ending our truncated 6-month budget. So we were looking at hopefully to get whatever we're gonna do at the end of, proposed, maybe adopted for the beginning of the next fiscal year, the begin, like around July. So, well, we're not gonna meet in July, so here's kind of what we were thinking. We give you the pro forma update, for you guys for you to digest, come back to you at the next board meeting, propose a rate increase, hopefully for, about that time we'll be able to adopt something to become in effect after, the beginning of the next fiscal year in July.
Okay.
And Mr. Perro, just if I could interject real quickly, and I'm not here to sell you on the rates as presented or anything. If you turn back to page 10, because somebody asked the question earlier, and I realize that at a certain point, we would hope those rate increases would taper, but for historical perspective, we've been in the 5 3/4 range in 2018 to 7 3/4 on water and sewer respectively. And the discussions were had when we were implementing case 3 from a couple years ago for the 4.38 and 5.38. The goal there, one of the added benefits was another project we had on the radar was instead of being 5 million, ended up only being 1.7 million. I think it was related to the dam, right? So we were able to keep our rate increases lower in that particular year because we were so well off and could pull out a significant capital project, or at least a significant portion that had been planned for that project. So historically, if you're looking at 6.76 and 7.76, it's not out of whack with what y'all have done over the course of a number of years to stay ahead of your operational and capital challenges, okay?
Could I ask one question?
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, we were kind of flatline. I'm assuming you were talking about consumptions.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so in considering that, looking at 2026, we're going to meet our minimum, but we are, experiencing one of the biggest booms that Amherst County's probably ever had with the town center project and some other things. Is that all into consideration, looking at additional revenue that hopefully we're looking forward to in 2026?
Right, projecting what consumption is going to be, right? Again, if you have good numbers for increases on the consumption, we can certainly drop that in and say, okay, well, maybe we only need, go with me for a minute, 5.5% and 6.5% because we expect our consumption to really jump in the next couple of years, right?
Okay.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that because you just don't know. It's unforeseen, it hasn't happened yet, so.
It's unproven.
Yes.
That's right. And that's why we're here, and that's why we do this annually and have been doing this annually with you all over the past decade, right? Is because all we can do is give you a point in time what the numbers look like. We're not here as salesmen trying to sell you on rate increases. We are just reporting the facts. So if you were let's go with me for a minute. If you adopted 6 and 7% for 2024, it could very well, depending on how one of the projects is redefined, based on consumption increases if we get them, those rate increases that we're projecting over a certain period of time, 3 to 5 years to stay in compliance, could drop down next year, just like in 2022, right? We were able to project lower and adopt in that specific year a much lower rate increase than we had been doing historically. This is, again, food for thought for you all to digest and ask, for amended cases.
Mr. Taylor, and Mr. Hall, I think we need to move on in the agenda, but what maybe I'd be interested in seeing is another case at, say, a 6% increase and then a 5% increase, if that's at all possible.
So for clarification, because we usually keep a 1% separator between the two, because sewer costs more, but it doesn't produce as much. Do you want 5, 6?
I was looking at water. I was looking at water specifically.
Oh, sorry.
What I'd like to see is just, if the board does not object, have something, one whole number below, so 100 basis points below what's been proposed, and then 200 basis points below what's been proposed.
Okay.
That, so.
Just do it in round
Yeah, round
for that.
numbers, just round
Yes, sir.
numbers. So that'd be 6 and 5 on the water, and it'd be 7 and 6 on the sewer.
Yes, sir.
And that, at least that way, we'd have an understanding of what that, how that affects us financially, and what the impact is to citizens, and we may be able to make a better decision at that point.
So just off the top of my head real quickly to clarify for that. So if we just, the way it is with the assumptions built in, if we drop from 6.67 and 7.67 and flatline those, we're going to dip below our bond coverage covenant.
In 2026,
Correct.
which means that you have to have a greater increase
In the next year.
in the
So
next fiscal year.
are you asking for 2024 to be these adjusted rate increases for just fiscal year '24 only, and then we have to project from '25 and beyond? I'm just trying to get clear so I don't,
Let's do it for this fiscal year only and highlight the fact that we've upset the covenant there, which as we go forward, we'll just have to know that we have to have a larger increase if we do that to meet that obligation. I'm trying not to overcomplicate it. I'm just trying to see what the facts are. But where do we break it? Right now, it's 2026, but if you drop it 200 basis points, it may be 2025.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would,
Yeah.
I know we need to move on. I can appreciate that. I think where I'm at right now, if I'm understanding correctly, is that this is a snapshot in time. There are some things we really don't know what might happen yet. We're looking for more information on this raw intake, which would bring our debt service way down, or at least, or, you know, could reduce it. If the town center goes in, if the other project.
Gateway.
Yes, the Gateway project moves forward, then there could be an increase in customers. So, yeah, I'm kind of satisfied with what you've presented. I don't have any problem with getting more information, but I think you've done a good job. So, thank you.
thank you. One other thing.
And I'm not questioning that.
No, no,
I
no,
think-
I know you're not.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure this board has
You just want to
options.
see how far you might miss the mark. Is that fair?
Yes.
I got you. It just, again, I hate to keep interjecting. So we're doing the Gateway interim financing right now. And just like we did, y'all may or may not be aware of this. We have to provide a certificate that shows we're going to meet that coverage over the next 2 to 3 or 5. It's 3, I think it's 3 years, 3 fiscal years, to VRA and to your other lender, Truist. So for our purposes of closing on the RAND next week, we are sharing with them based on this. To clarify, you all are looking at these other scenarios for purposes of digestion, not necessarily that it wouldn't be a fair representation to sign off on a certificate that shows you meeting the coverage by producing the revenue rates that we've shown in here.
You might have asked this.
Was that?
You might have asked this, but if we did raise the rates, when would we have to do that?
July.
July 1. They come effective July 1. Now that you're in the new fiscal year setup.
I'm beginning, I'll tell this board, I'm beginning to get a little squirrely about running into covenant issues and so forth. I just don't like that. Personally, I don't like the idea of this rate increase, but I feel like my back's against the wall. Let's, go ahead, Mr.
One
Wood.
thing, excuse me, one thing we haven't done is raise the base fee for quite some time on the water. And that might be an easier, to me, it seems like it's less complicated to bump that rate a little bit, because it's been flat since 2019, essentially. And I think it was flat prior to that, 18 years prior. Just a thought of different way of getting there.
Wait, and, all right, I'm sorry, the base fee, is that a fixed fee that a variable fee is added to, or is it just the?
You have
the-
your basic fee, and then you have the rates for usage.
Okay, got it, thanks.
Yes, sir.
And then you combine the two, and that comes up with your total.
Yes, sir.
Now, I begin to think we have to stay where we are. So we don't, this is not a decision we have to make today. This is a decision that we'll be making next week. Maybe I've asked for too much follow-up information, or maybe it's not relative enough. It sounds like it's going to be pretty dire, so why don't we only do one of those situations, which is coming down to 6% on water and 7% on sewer? And could you do another showing a dollar increase of the base fee for each of those? Which I think is actually going to jump you up.
I was
Pretty
just
high.
thinking on the water side.
On just the water side?
We've been increasing the base fee on sewer, and the
Okay.
projection is to continue to increase that by $1, but the water's been flat.
On the water side only, excuse me.
Gotcha. Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Anything else that we want to talk about on this, or any other burning questions, or can we move on? Mr. Taylor, thanks for giving us a lot to chew on, and glad to see you back, and thank you for making the effort to join us today and get this out.
Certainly, and I would just offer up, if you all think of anything in the next week or two that you want to funnel through Richard, we're happy to, include it, incorporate it into some updated analysis for
Okay.
early June meeting.
All right, let's say if you've got any updates or any other requests, or something hits you in the middle of the night, ask Richard before close of business next Tuesday. All right, so it gives you a full week. After that,
That'd be great.
we're off to the races. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is item D, the draft budget for FY 23-24.
We were hopeful to be at a point at this time of our budget cycle that the county financial software would be far enough along to absorb us into their system, and we'd have a new format for our budget that would align with their software to help us with auditing and et cetera. We're just not there yet. We are reaching the end of our budget cycle, so what I'm presenting to you is a draft budget without having the pro forma to lean back on. The approach was to take the budget that we had in place for the truncated 6-month and to move those line items right across for a 12-month budget. Those numbers appear to be working well when we look at a GL 40 trial balance sheet. So we don't see any problems with those numbers. Also, they were, the previous director, when he did present those to you guys, he actually inflated, he accounted for some inflation in there on those. So I feel comfortable presenting those as is. The known items that did not need to go into a 12-month, for example, let's say it was an insurance payment or something, that's one time a year, those were just moved straight across. We also did put in the budget the projects that we have upcoming. We have $2 million for the James River bank stabilization project coming from the federal government, and of course the gateway and the James River raw water intake added some money in there to actually get the project off the ground. So at any rate, I think that 8%, it actually came out to a little less than 8% as far as what we had, the adjustments on our receivable side of the budget to make sure that our operational and capital obligations were met. I don't think that's too far out of line with the current inflation. So I feel comfortable presenting this to you as a draft just to take a look at for the month. Hopefully during the month, Stacy and I can get together and go over these and fine tune these numbers, and we'll also take a look at the pro forma. And at the next board meeting, we'll present you a final budget that will carry us into the next fiscal year.
And Mr. Hall, it looks like you presented us with a balanced budget, so thank you for that. Just a quick question. I was trying to find, oh, there it is. O&M, where is the admin salaries? Which line item is that? Page 7?
I think it is page 7 of the budget.
Oh, got it.
Yep.
Looks like you're proposing a 8% wage increase across. the
Okay,
board.
let me explain that. I aligned it with 7%, as I understand the county is proposing for a COLA. I've added 1% because we have some standard operating procedures that allows an apprentice to come on board with us, and after they pass their probationary and they move up to, let's say, going from an apprentice mechanic to mechanic.
I'm not questioning it, I just wanted to make sure you had it proposed, the cost of living.
All right, so the answer to your question, I have 7% for COLA, I have 1% in there for some other adjustments for
Okay.
operational purposes.
Very good, thank you.
Based on promotions or
Get your CDL
certifications?
license, type of thing, yeah.
Okay. I think we should talk a little bit just to make sure that the executive compensation number is close to what we think it should be as well. All right. We can have that as a follow-up discussion after this meeting today. Any specific questions on the budget? Again, we're not adopting it this time, but we are expected to adopt next week, or next month. All right, hearing none, I'm going to move on. Item number E, or letter E, miscellaneous matters. Mr. Hall?
I wanted to make sure that the board and the public is aware that we received an alleged notice of violation from the Office of Drinking Water, and basically what happened is that we had a clerical mistake on a form that's filled in that we do monthly. We take 15 samples across our water system per month. We were supposed to list the disinfection level of the chlorine. We forgot basically to fill in a box. And so typically this would be something that was sent back, but the timing wasn't there, and I guess the Office of Drinking Water maybe having some issues with, with their employee levels and things. But either way, we received a notice of alleged violation. The actual results back from the central lab indicated that there's no issues with the quality of the drinking water. There were no coliforms or anything in our samples. So basically, we will report this in our 2023 Consumer Confidence Report and move on.
Mr. Hall, would you answer this yes or no? I think this is what I heard you say. I'm confident, but I just want to state it very clearly.
Yes.
There are no issues with the quality of our water from this test sample.
That is correct.
The only problem was there is a Scribner's error where a box wasn't checked.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other miscellaneous matters or any questions on the notice of alleged violation? All right.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Now is section 8, time for citizen comment. Is it, sir?
I'm not a citizen, but I thought if I could get.
It's an appropriate time. Yes, sir.
Chairman, if I could just get you to sign for 1 second, I'll leave you.
Can you hang on for 2 seconds, and then we'll get you on the way? All right, I see no other comments from the citizenry. Item 9 is closed session. We're going to talk about specifically candidates for the executive director position and a separate discussion regarding the interim executive director appointment. Is there somebody that would please make a motion for us?
I'll make a motion that the ASCA board enter into closed session pursuant to section 2.23711A1 of the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended, for discussion regarding candidates to fill the vacant executive director position, and a separate discussion regarding the interim executive director appointment.
Thank you. Any discussion on this item? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are in closed session. Thank you. And Ms. Felix, would you join us, please? Thanks. Mr. Bryant, maybe would you?
Have fun. Oh, you want, all right.
Got a motion in there. We don't have one.
You gotta make it up, but, let's get a closed session All right, everybody here? Okay, closed session is now complete. We need to make I'd like the certification, please, if somebody could move the certification, which I believe is, I did not print it. I'm out. Do you have a copy of the certification that you could share with us? Just
I have, is this,
Yes, that's it. Are you,
see, I make a motion that wait, we gotta come out, right?
we're out.
All right, I make a motion that the ACSA Board certify by recorded vote that to the best of each board member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempt from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion authorizing the closed session were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed session.
All right, any discussion on that? And is that a roll call vote?
Yes.
All right. By roll call, yea or nay, Mr. Martin?
Aye, yay.
All right, yes, aye or nay. Mr. Pugh?
Aye.
Mr. Wood? Aye. And Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Mr. Wood?
I'd also like to make a motion that we increase the interim appointed director's salary increase by 10% from the date of Mr. Hopkins' departure up to the point that a replacement is appointed and working at the Service Authority for that interim time
Great. Okay.
pursuant to the matters discussed in the closed session.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on that item? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for your work there, Mr. Hall, very much.
Thank you very much.
Any matters from the members of the Service Authority Board? Mr. Martin, Mr. Pugh, Mr. Wade, Mr. Wood. Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you. All right, thank you, guys. Sorry to not give you that much more time.
What's that?
Thanks, Wes, for covering for me early.
No problem. What's that?
Thank you.